He didn't cry. That's what got me. 15 years, and when they handed him the generic beige box like some sad party favor for the unemployed, he just stood there, still in that oatmeal sweater he wore on audit weeks, nodded once and slipped a flash drive into his shirt pocket like it was a pocket square. No outburst, no speech, just a long, slow blink. The kind that says you'll hear from me again, but not the way you expect. Callie, our HR rep who thinks empathy is a Slack emoji, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed like a smug middle manager on some reality TV tribunal, and delivered the line she probably rehearsed in the mirror. Don't bother with a claim. We'll contest it. Save your energy. She even smiled, like this was a favor. Mason didn't flinch. Just asked if he could take his pen, the one with the company's name etched in cheap faux chrome. When Callie gave a theatrical nod, he picked it up like it was an artifact from a failed empire. Then he walked out, past the ficus no one waters, past the new intern who couldn't meet his eyes, past the printout on the bulletin board about Employee Appreciation Week still taped up from May. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word, but I saw the way the floor shifted, like something foundational had just been quietly removed. If you're still here, listening, tap that like button and subscribe. 97% of you never do, and it means the world to the team. Help stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. All right, back to it. You've got to understand who Mason was. He didn't gossip, didn't schmooze, never showed up to the happy hour karaoke disasters. But he knew every policy clause by heart, had backup folders of backup folders, and once caught a VP trying to erase an overtime policy change minutes before payroll. When he flagged it, he didn't yell. He just sent the version history and CC'd the VP's boss. He was methodical, quiet, dangerous in that way only truly competent people can be, which is why they got rid of him. Call it restructuring, that's what they'll tell you. But I was in the room when the strategy deck called it risk management. Not in terms of Mason's performance. No, his files were cleaner than legal's. They meant risk as in he knew too much. He'd seen too many last-minute terminations, too many voluntary exits that were anything but. Too many times Callie lost a discrimination complaint just long enough for the statute to expire. And he remembered. Worse, he documented. Once in the break room, I joked that he must have a bunker somewhere full of old HR emails and coffee-stained resignation memos. He just smiled and said, "Some of us keep receipts." I didn't get it then. But now I remember the way he paused by the copy machine on his last day, the old one, the one only Mason still used because he didn't trust the cloud integrations. He stood there for a beat, printed something, folded it, and tucked it into his box under a tangle of charger cords and his annotated copy of the 2014 Labor Code. He looked at me once on his way out, just nodded, and then he was gone. That's when the silence started feeling heavier, like a barometric pressure shift before a tornado. And sure enough, Callie kept smiling that same lizard smile like nothing had changed, but you could feel it. Something had been set in motion. We just didn't know it yet. Not until the Cobra mess. Not until the file folder that accidentally disappeared. Not until his name showed up again, weeks later in a way no one expected. But I'll get to that. Because if you think Mason was the kind of man to go quietly, you haven't met someone who weaponized paper cuts. I didn't expect to see him again. Not so soon. But there he was, hunched in the lobby of Roseview Memory Care, rubbing his thumb over a parking stub like he was trying to wear a hole through time. He didn't see me at first. Just stared out the window while the receptionist tapped at a keyboard and gave him that look. Half patience, half pity. I only caught his eye when I walked past with my mom's prescriptions in hand. He forced a smile, but his face looked wrong. Like he'd forgotten how to wear it. Said he was visiting his mother, Ruth. I remembered Ruth. Sweet lady. Always wore a brooch and called every nurse honey. Her room was on the second floor near the bird mural that peeled in the corner. Mason used to come by twice a week. Always brought crossword books and vanilla pudding. That day, though, he wasn't carrying anything but an envelope. And tension. "I'm not on her insurance record anymore," he said, almost like he was apologizing. "They said the Cobra coverage hasn't processed." I blinked. "But they're supposed to automatically." "Yeah." His jaw tightened. "They were supposed to." He didn't say more, Didn't have to. I'd worked in that building long enough to know the rhythm of corporate betrayals. The quiet ones, the ones that slip in like mold behind drywall. That look he had wasn't anger. It was subtraction. Like someone had erased a part of him and left the edges frayed. He left the receptionist a note to call if billing escalated, then walked out without seeing his mom. Said he'd be back the next day. That was the moment I realized something was brewing. Mason didn't miss visits, not unless something serious had snapped. Later that week, I saw him again, this time in the public library, back corner by the dusty tax code books no one checked out. He had his laptop open, a black coffee untouched beside it, and stacks of printed PDFs with color-coded tabs. I stood far enough away that he didn't see me, but close enough to read the labels. Termination Protocol V4, Employee Exit Agreement Templates, Cobra Compliance Statute 29 USC FARBA 161. The man was building something. That same night, my curiosity got the better of me. I looked back through old HR communications, stuff Mason used to quietly correct with post-it notes and time-stamped PDFs. That's when I saw it. The old names. Folks I remembered. Jen, Marco, Denny, all resigned voluntarily, or so the company line went. But I remembered how Denny cried in the parking lot, how Jen left mid-quarter with no goodbye. Mason had copies of all their actual exit memos. I'd bet my next paycheck on it. He once told me, "The problem isn't that they lie. The problem is they write the lies in pencil." And he'd made a career of keeping the ink. I didn't confront him, didn't ask. But every time I passed his old desk, still empty and sad-looking with the dented keyboard tray, I noticed things others missed, like the locked drawer no one could open, or the fact that his login credentials hadn't been fully revoked until 3 days after he left. Callie forgot to submit the access revocation form on time. A rookie mistake. Or maybe just arrogance. What really did it, though, was the typo in his termination letter. Mason wouldn't have missed it. A clause about severance being at the company's discretion that contradicted a 2016 HR memo he helped write. I remembered that memo. He cited case law, quoted it word for word during a brown bag lunch when legal was trying to sneak in arbitration waivers. And now they'd tripped over their own paper trail. He was piecing something together, slowly, quietly, but with the precision of someone who's waited years for the right day. And when it came, they wouldn't even see it coming. Mason didn't drive his usual car to the appointment. He borrowed his cousin's weathered Buick, the kind of inconspicuous vehicle that blends into parking lots and doesn't get noticed by the kind of people who scan license plates for gossip. I only knew because he told me later, in passing, like it wasn't the most calculated part of his plan. The attorney's office sat between a bail bonds place and a vape shop with a broken open sign. Not exactly prestige, but that was the point. He wasn't looking for flash. He was looking for firepower with nothing to lose, and he found it in a woman named Sheila Dans, labor law specialist. 10 years running class actions for restaurant workers and warehouse grunts who got chewed up by loopholes. Her Yelp reviews called her aggressive, ruthless, and my personal favorite, a smiling hammer. He walked in with a zip folder titled "For Legal Eyes Only," said he'd been backing up files since 2018, said he wasn't angry, just ready. Sheila raised an eyebrow when she opened the drive. 10 minutes in, she stopped scrolling. 20 minutes in, she started printing. There were spreadsheets with color-coded timestamp trails, clock-in data showing consultants logging 50-plus hours a week, but classified as 1099 contractors with no benefits. There were internal HR memos marked "Do Not Circulate," detailing strategic offboarding language. There was even a side-by-side comparison of payroll reports, actual versus filed, for a 6-month stretch where overtime had mysteriously vanished. But what made her lean back in her chair and whistle was the email chain. A director had instructed a junior HR assistant to retroactively change an employee's file to read "voluntary resignation" 3 days after that same employee had been walked out by security. And Mason had it, with timestamps, with metadata, with the assistant's panicked follow-up. "Are we sure this is okay?" Sheila folded her hands. "This isn't a complaint. It's a pattern." Mason nodded. "Can you file it under your name?" She frowned. "You're not interested in being the face of this?" "No," he said, calm as ever. "I'm interested in them not knowing who they're dealing with. Not yet. She took the case, filed discreetly under her firm's banner, didn't name Mason in the paperwork, didn't trigger the company's automatic response filters, just sent the first volley into the machine and waited. And Mason? He disappeared. Not physically. He still visited his mom, still walked the block, still shopped at the same grocery store. But digitally, he vanished. No LinkedIn updates, no resume spam, no email forwarding. He shut down every trace of his professional existence like someone wiping a drive. I heard he even called his old roommate from college, a cybersecurity geek, to help close the windows. Whatever that means. The office buzzed for a week after the news of a labor claim broke. Vaguely, through whispers and assumption. Nobody knew who it was. HR said it was frivolous. Legal said it was standard. Callie? She said nothing. Just clicked her pen like a nervous tick and avoided eye contact. But some of us remembered. Remembered Mason's binders. Remembered his quiet sighs when policies got updated overnight. Remembered the way he used to say, "If you're going to erase history, don't forget I wrote the first draft." They thought he'd been buried. They didn't realize he'd buried the fuse. They were already drafting their canned response before the legal notice even hit the printer tray. Callie sat at the head of the conference table like she was running a high-stakes poker game, only she thought she held a full house and didn't notice the hole in the table. "It's probably one of those warehouse temps who thinks they're owed stock options," she said with a scoff, twirling her pen like she wanted it to stab the air. "We'll hit them with the arbitration clause and that'll be the end of it. No big deal." Across from her, the HR director, Janice, the one with the forced laugh and a desk full of fake succulents, nodded too quickly. "Let legal swat it down," she echoed, like she'd just won a spelling bee. They passed around talking points, prepped a "we take compliance seriously" internal memo, and started rehearsing lines for the all-hands meeting no one asked for. It was theater. Cheap theater. But the kind that plays just well enough to keep the interns calm. Then Paige, barely 2 months into her admin role and still terrified of touching anything marked confidential, spoke up. "I noticed something weird," she said, her voice too soft for that room. One of the email addresses listed in the notice, the formatting, it matches old compliance report submissions. Callie blinked. "What kind of formatting?" Paige pulled up a sample. Underscore before the initials, double-digit day stamp. It's how Mason labeled all his early flag reports. The room quieted for a second. Not long. Just enough to notice. Janice dismissed it with a wave. "Coincidence. Mason wouldn't stir the pot. He's too..." "Polite?" someone muttered. "Predictable," Janice corrected, forcing a chuckle that no one joined in on. "Besides, he took that old desktop with him. Nothing on the servers. Nothing traceable." But even as they brushed it off with smugness, something changed. Because in another room, much smaller, much quieter, 2 legal associates were whispering over a stack of printed emails and audit logs. One of them, Miguel, had been around long enough to remember a time Mason flagged a conflict of interest clause that saved the company a 6-figure fine. And now Miguel was holding a report that seemed too clean, too recent, too deliberate. He ran a script against internal correspondence going back 5 years, started matching phrases from the legal notice to archived reports, 1099 designations for full-time staff, COBRA discrepancies, ghost roles. Each match came with a timestamp, and every timestamp circled back to Mason's old folders. Miguel didn't tell Janice, not yet. He just kept printing. Later that afternoon, the general counsel quietly scheduled an internal audit sweep. No press, no warnings, just a silent ping to the compliance review team with a subject line. Urgent look back, labor exposure risk. On the surface, nothing looked wrong. HR sent their usual upbeat Slack messages. Janice hosted a webinar on positive off-boarding experiences. Callie went back to her Pilates and Pinot Instagram routine, but under the hood, people were waking up because someone hadn't just filed a complaint. They'd mapped a minefield, and the first crack had just formed beneath their designer heels. It was a Tuesday, quiet, normal, boring. One of those days where people pretend to work while secretly clicking through Zillow listings they'll never afford. Janice had just finished her second caramel latte and was gearing up to deliver a painfully forced birthday card to someone in accounting when the elevator dinged. 2 people stepped out. No badges, no smiles, just dark blazers, neutral expressions, and the kind of posture that says we don't knock. They didn't wait for reception, walked straight through like they'd practiced it, past the wall of meaningless Top Workplace 2020 plaques and the decorative shelf full of untouched HR awards, straight into HR's glass box like it was theirs. One man, one woman. Both carried black zip folders. No nonsense. No emotion. "Janice Welker?" the man asked. She looked up, confused but still in her customer service voice. "Yes. Can I help?" "We're from the Department of Labor. We're delivering a formal request under Section 2111 of the Labor Standards Act." Just like that. Callie, sitting a few desks over, visibly paled. Her screen still showed an open Slack chat with Janice titled, "Contain any fallout?" The woman investigator slid a sealed folder across the table like it was evidence in a courtroom. Janice stared at it for a beat too long. Then she opened it. And there it was. Page 1. Complainant. Harlow Mason J. I wasn't in the room, but someone was. Someone who later told me she didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Just sat there, lips parted, staring at the name like it was a ghost. Like it had scratched its way back up through the floorboards with receipts in both hands. Then, in that brittle HR tone she defaulted to when trying not to scream, Janice asked, "And this is about Mason's termination?" The agent didn't blink. "It's about patterns, your company's employment classification system, COBRA handling process, and overtime policies." Mr. Harlow's documentation triggered a broader inquiry. A broader inquiry, which is legal speak for. We're not just looking at him, we're looking at all of it. They asked for digital records, hiring memos, independent contractor contracts, audit logs, and emails. They had a printed list. It was 4 pages long. They requested interviews, not optional. They wanted names of everyone in HR for the past 7 years. They wanted financial documentation tied to bonus incentives for cost-saving terminations. They asked about the internal software used to classify employees, the same one Mason once flagged for quietly defaulting workers to exempt status. Janice nodded. Callie stopped breathing. Paige, poor thing, dropped her pen. Nobody laughed. Nobody said frivolous or standard or we'll swat it down, because now the SWAT team was in the building and they weren't leaving with cupcakes and swag. That afternoon, every floor buzzed with whispers. Who filed it? What's it about? Why Mason? But no one had answers, just a growing sense that something huge had just cracked open beneath us, and we were all standing on it. Later, someone saw Janice in the stairwell, phone pressed to her ear, voice tight and low. "They brought up ghost rolls," she hissed. "We need to scrub the—" Then she stopped talking. Maybe because she realized that this time, the walls really were listening. And Mason? Still gone, still off the grid. But his name wasn't gone. It was there, bold, inked on page 1 of a federal folder, and suddenly it weighed more than the whole HR department combined. It started with a clipboard and a polite knock. By Friday, it felt like a crime scene. The labor board investigators didn't yell, didn't posture. They just quietly requested time. 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Started with the junior folks, admins, receptionists, payroll processors, the people no one ever asks about until it's too late. And that's when it all began to unravel. First came the whispers. That Mason, quiet, cardigan-wearing Mason, hadn't just taken his flash drive when he left. He'd left behind something. An index. Not in the obvious places. No, that would have been too easy. But buried in shared folders, misnamed things like Q3 training materials and old desk reference. And it was dated. Labeled. Cross-referenced. Someone found it, probably by accident. It contained archived approval chains, old policy versions, and an internal org chart showing discrepancies between listed employees and real ones. One doc caught particular attention. Ghost Roll Reconciliation Report. Time-stamped. Initialed. It showed how HR would create temp positions in payroll to simulate full-time hires during audits, positions that didn't exist and were closed days later without ever hiring a soul. The idea was to make the staffing numbers match government funding requirements without actually paying for the labor. That alone would have been a scandal. But it got worse. Because Mason had also logged every change made to the 1099 contractor roster over 4 years. Dozens of names, people who'd worked full 40-hour weeks, reported to managers, used company tools but were never on payroll, never got benefits, never clocked overtime. The approval process? Just a checkbox in an internal tool, one that legal now realized had no audit trail because IT streamlined it years ago on Janice's suggestion. Mason had saved screenshots. Even tracked how Callie once retroactively changed a job listing from full-time to freelance 2 weeks after someone was fired, just to avoid COBRA obligations. People were called in one by one. Paige cried after her interview. One of the project managers came out white as drywall and didn't go back to her desk. The IT director canceled his trip to Orlando, and somewhere between interviews, someone slipped. Someone mentioned that Mason hadn't just kept his receipts, he'd planted them. Quietly, strategically, like time bombs, like he knew the house of cards would fall and wanted to make sure it hit every single floor on the way down. The CFO tried to play defense, got on the phone with legal and suggested a quick settlement, a payout to minimize exposure. But the labor board agents declined. Federal procedure. Investigation was already formalized. They couldn't just pay to make it vanish, not anymore. Not with keywords like willful misclassification and systemic fraud starting to appear in the formal language. Control started slipping like sand through corporate fingers. Weekly meetings became daily ones. All staff updates started landing in inboxes every other hour. People stopped sitting at the cafeteria tables by the HR side of the office. Janice moved her files to a locked cabinet. Callie stopped posting on LinkedIn. I caught her once staring at her screen like it might suddenly spit out an arrest warrant. Because once that ghost roll document came out, and once people realized it had been initialed by both HR and finance, it wasn't just about Mason anymore. It was about everyone who signed, everyone who looked away, everyone who thought a paper trail couldn't scream. They stopped saying his name like it was a stain. Now they said it like a warning. Like a ghost story you whisper at the edge of the break room fridge, half hoping he won't hear you from whatever shadowed place he'd vanished into. Harlow. Not Mason. Not that guy from compliance. No, now it was Harlow. Sharp, syllabic, and heavy. You'd hear it in corners. Did you hear what Harlow had on them? Someone said Harlow predicted this 3 years ago. Harlow left breadcrumbs. Check the finance templates. People who hadn't even worked with him started referencing him like he was folklore, a myth built from metadata, like he'd written his name into the building's bones. Then came the memo. Someone, I won't say who, slipped it to him, scanned it from their work phone, sent it through a burner Gmail made just for the occasion. Subject line, you should see this. It was plain, just bullet points, no official letterhead. But the language was unmistakable. In the event you are contacted by the Department of Labor, do not speculate about or reference any current or former employee suspected of initiating the complaint. In particular, avoid mention of M. Harlow unless formally instructed by legal. Unless formally instructed. Like his name was a grenade and they were waiting for the pin to finish spinning. When I showed it to Mason, weeks later, in a quiet cafe where he still took his coffee black and his answers slower than most people had patience for, he didn't laugh, just pressed 2 fingers to his lips like he was holding in something. Then he smiled. Funny, he said. I offered to fix their process once. I remembered. He drafted a new HR integrity policy back in 2019. I saw it. 30 pages, color-coded appendices, automated audit suggestions, even a peer review clause. He called it Compliance Flow 3.0. Said it could cut legal risk by 60% and prevent at least 3 recurring violations per quarter. He gave a presentation in the small conference room with the broken HDMI port. Brought muffins. Janice didn't even look at the packet, called it too picky, said, "We don't need more bureaucracy, Mason. We need people to stop playing hall monitor." Callie rolled her eyes and whispered something about him being the HR version of a hall pass Nazi, so he shelved it. Never pushed. Just filed it away in that same corner of his mind where he kept every overlooked correction, every offhand insult, every eye roll that came when he tried to make things better. They said no to the policy, so he became the policy. Now, they were tearing apart their own systems, trying to understand what he already knew. and all Mason did was sip his coffee, watching a toddler knock over napkin holders with more grace than legal had shown this entire month. I asked if he felt vindicated, if he was going to post something online, re-emerge, take credit. He shook his head. I'm not interested in credit. Then what? I asked. He looked past me, out the window, the street reflected in his glasses. I just want the next poor kid who works there to be able to ask questions without getting fired for it. And in that moment, I realized the real shift wasn't the panic in the HR suite, or the lawyers scrambling to rewrite job titles. It was that they were hiding from him, and he was done hiding from anyone. The email hit every inbox at 9:03 a.m., subject line in bold, stamped with a red exclamation mark like it was just another reminder about phishing awareness training. Notice of formal action. Department of Labor compliance findings. Nobody moved. Phones buzzed, heads lifted. Even the engineers, who usually kept their headphones sealed tighter than a submarine hatch, pulled one earbud out to listen. The silence was sharp, like the oxygen had been yanked from the room. The memo laid it out plainly. The Department of Labor had concluded its investigation. Findings included multiple confirmed counts of wage theft, willful misclassification of employees, failure to provide federally mandated benefits under COBRA, and the maintenance of fraudulent ghost role employment entries to mislead audits. There were no euphemisms, no hedging, just law. Penalties estimated at $4.6 million pending final audit. Within hours, the HR director's office was emptied. Succulents gone, nameplate yanked clean, her Slack status changed to deactivated. Janice didn't even say goodbye. Security walked her out during lunch. No one clapped. No one spoke. Just the hiss of the glass doors sliding shut behind her like punctuation. Callie tried to hang on. She tweeted something vague about new chapters and locked her account within the hour. I heard from someone in legal that she'd been placed on indefinite leave. Pending investigation, they said. Everyone knew what that meant. The real stunner came later that afternoon. The lawyer, James Lott, head of corporate counsel, the same man who smugly told the board there's no real threat here and refused to settle early, was let go. Not quietly either. The boardroom glass door was still swinging open when someone from facilities was already removing his name from the directory. His severance? Revoked. Turns out he'd misrepresented the severity of the claims in 2 internal memos now under legal scrutiny themselves. Word spread fast. But the part that really lit the internal rumor engine? Mason. His name appeared again. This time not in whispers, but on an official offer letter. The company wanted him back, not as an employee, as a consultant, independent, full authority to rebuild their compliance structure from the ground up. They even offered back pay for the COBRA lapse and a 6-figure retainer, said he'd bring integrity back to the process. He declined. Politely, quietly, the way he always did things, he didn't gloat, didn't leak it to the press. He just forwarded the offer to a friend, me, with a single-line reply. They still don't get it. That evening, I watched from my office window as a moving crew carried out shredded paper bins, busted file cabinets, and a couple of the fake awards from the HR wall. One fell and cracked on the pavement. No one picked it up. They'd finally paid the price. Not just in money, but in names, in titles, in reputations, in the eyes of the junior staff who now whispered not about being the next to go, but about how they'd never let this happen again. I called Mason, asked if he'd heard. I heard, he said. And? He sighed. It's not about watching them fall. It's about making sure someone's there to rebuild it right after. He didn't want their money. He didn't want their apology. He wanted the system to stop bleeding people dry. And if they weren't going to fix it, then he damn well wasn't going to help patch it either. The headline ran above the fold in the Sunday business section. Pattern of deceit. Federal labor investigation ends in record penalty for mid-market tech firm. Underneath, a photo of the office building, facade sunlit, blinds drawn tight, looked almost innocent. Like the lies hadn't been printed, signed, and filed in triplicate behind those windows for years. The article named names: Janice, Callie, the ex-lawyer now under bar review. The fine, $5.2 million and climbing, employee restitution packages, COBRA retroactive coverage. And most curiously, it referenced an anonymous internal source, alias submitted as MH, who provided what the Department of Labor described as an unprecedented level of documentation clarity and systemic insight. The story got picked up by labor forums, HR circles, even a Reddit thread that climbed to the front page. Comments flooded in. "This is why you document everything. MH is a legend. Some people keep receipts. This guy built a fussing archive." And Mason? He didn't read the comments, didn't need the spotlight. He just kept doing what he'd always done, showing up with a quiet binder and a better way. I saw him again months later at a coffee shop off 3rd and Langston, same booth in the corner, near the flickering lamp no one fixed. He was hunched beside a fresh-faced startup founder in her 20s, wide-eyed, eager, nervous about her first round of hires. Mason had her laptop pulled up to a shared doc titled Employment Practices and Early Policy Guidelines. No jargon, no fluff. Just common sense protections and real enforceable terms. At one point, she leaned back and asked him, "Why are you helping us? I mean, after what you've been through." He paused, watching steam curl from his chipped mug. Then he looked at her, gently, with none of the weariness I'd seen during those brutal final months at the company. "Because someday," he said, "someone like me might walk through your door, and you want them to stay." The founder blinked, then nodded. No more questions. He went back to typing. She went back to listening, and outside, the sun kept rising. Not all revenge needs a headline. Some of it looks like policy, like protection, like a kid building something right from the ground up with guardrails someone else bled to install. Paper cuts don't always scream, but they bleed. And Mason made sure the stains told a story no one could erase again.